Hello, this is the book of History of Modern India by Bipin Chandra. Now I am going to read the sixth chapter, Social and Cultural Awakening in the First Half of the 19th Century. The name of the chapter is Social and Cultural Awakening in the First Half of the 19th Century. This is the sixth chapter. Immense intellectual and cultural stirring characterized 19th century in India. The impact of modern Western culture and consciousness of defeat by a foreign power gave birth to a new awakening. There was an awareness that a vast country like India had been colonized by a handful of foreigners because of the internal weakness of Indian social structure and culture. Thoughtful Indians began to look for the strength and weakness of their society and for ways and means of removing the weaknesses. While a large number of Indians refused to come to terms with the West and still put their faith in traditional Indian ideas and institutions, others gradually came to hold that elements of modern Western thoughts had to be imbibed for the regeneration of their society. They were impressed in particular by modern science and the doctrines of reason of humanism, while differing on the nature and extent of reforms. Nearly all 19th century intellectuals shared the conviction that social and religious reform was urgently needed. Ram Mohan Rai. The central figure in this awakening was Ram Mohan Roy, who is rightly regarded as the first great leader of modern India. Ram Mohan Roy was moved by deep love for his people and country and worked hard all his life for their social, religious, intellectual, and political regeneration. He was pained by the stagnation and corruption of contemporary Indian society, which was at that time dominated by caste and convention. Popular religion was full of superstitions and was exploited by ignorant and corrupt priests. The upper classes were selfish and often sacrificed social interest to their own narrow interests. Ram Mohan Roy possessed great love and respect for the traditional philosophic system of the East, but at the same time, he believed that modern culture alone would help to regenerate Indian society. In particular, he wanted his countrymen to accept the rational and scientific approach and the principle of human dignity and social equality of all men and women. He also wanted the introduction of modern capitalism and industry in the country. Ram Mohan Roy represented a synthesis of the thought of East and West. He was a scholar who knew over a dozen languages, including Sanskrit, Persian, Arabic, English, French, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. As a young man, he had studied Sanskrit literature and Hindu philosophy at Varanasi and the Quran and Persian and Arabic literature at Patna. He was also well acquainted with Jainism and other religious movements and sects of India. Later, he made an intensive study of Western thoughts and culture to study the Bible in the original. He learned Greek and Hebrew. In 1809, he wrote in Persian his famous work, Gift of Monotheist, in which he put forward weighty arguments against the belief in many gods and for the worship of single God. He settled in Kolkata in 1814 and soon attracted a band of young men with whose cooperation he started the Atmiya Sabha. From now on, he carried on a persistent struggle against the religious and social evils widely prevalent among the Hindus in Bengal. In particular, he vigorously opposed their worship of idols the rigidity of caste, and the prevalence of meaningless religious rituals. He condemned the priestly class of encouraging these practices. He held that all the principal ancient texts of Hindus preached monotheism or worship of one god. He published the Bengali translation of the Vedas and five of the principal Upanishads to prove his point. He also wrote a series of tracts and pamphlets in defense of monotheism. While citing ancient authority for his philosophical views, Ram Mohan Roy relied ultimately on the power of human reason, which was, in his view, the final touchstone of the truth of any doctrine, Eastern or Western. He believed that the philosophy of Vedanta was based on the principle of reason. In any case, one should not hesitate to depart from holy books, scriptures, and inherited traditions of if human reason so dictates, and if such traditions are proving harmful to society. But Ram Mohan Roy did not confine his application of the rational approach to Indian religions and traditions alone. In this, he disappointed his many missionary friends who had opined that his rational critique of Hinduism would lead him to embrace Christianity. Ram Mohan Roy insisted on applying rationalism to Christianity too, particularly to the elements of blind faith in it. In 1820, he published his Precepts of Jesus, in which he tried to separate the moral and philosophic message of the New Testament, which he praised from its miracle stories. He wanted the high moral message of Christ to be incorporated in Hinduism. This earned for him the hostility of the missionaries. Thus, as far as Ramon was concerned, there was to be no blind reliance on Indians' own past or blind aping of the West. On the other hand, he put forward the idea that the new India, guided by reason, should acquire and treasure all that was best in the East and West. Thus, he wanted India to learn from the West, but this learning was to be an intellectual and creative process through which Indian culture and thought were to be renovated. It was not to be an imposition of Western culture in India. He therefore stood for the reform of Hinduism and opposed its supersession by Christianity. He vigorously defended Hindu religion and philosophy from the ignorant attacks of the missionaries. At the same time, he adopted an extremely friendly attitude towards other religions. He believed that basically all religions preach a common message and that their followers are all brothers under the same skin. All his life, Ram Mohan Roy paid heavily for his daring religious outlook. The Orthodox condemned him for criticizing idolatry for his philosophic administration of Christianity and Islam. They organized a social boycott against him, in which even his mother joined. He was branded a heretic and an outcast. In 1828, he founded a new religious society, that Brahmo Sabha, later known as Brahmo Samaj, whose purpose was to purify Hinduism and to preach monotheism or belief in one God. The new society was to be based on the twin pillars of reason and the Vedas and Upanishads. It was also to incorporate the teaching of other religions. The Brahmo Samaj laid emphasis on human dignity, opposed idolatry, and criticized such social evils as the practice of sati. Ram Mohan Roy was a great thinker. He was also a man of action. There was hardly any aspect of nation building that he left untouched. In fact, just as he began the reform of Hindu religion from within, he also laid the foundations for the reform of Indian society. The best example of his lifelong crusade against social evils was the historic agitation and organized against the inhuman custom of women becoming sati. Beginning in 1818, he set out to rouse public opinion on the question. On the one hand, he showed, by citing the authority of the oldest sacred books, the Hindu religion at its best was opposed to the practice. On the other, he appealed to the reason, humanity, and compassion of the people. He visited the burning ghats at Kolkata to try to persuade the relatives of widows to give up their plan to self-immolation. The organized groups of like-minded people to keep a strict check on such performances and to prevent any attempt to force the widows to become sati. When the Orthodox Hindus petitioned Parliament to withhold its approval of Bentinck's action to ban the right of sati, he organized a counter-petition of enlightened Hindus in favor of Bentinck's action. He was a stout champion of women's rights. He condemned the subjugation of women and opposed the prevailing idea that women were inferior to men in intellect or in moral sense. He attacked polygamy and the degraded state to which widows were often reduced. To raise the status of women, he demanded that they be given the right of inheritance and property. He, Rammohn Roy was one of the earliest propagators of modern education, which he looked upon as a major instrument for the spread of modern ideas in the country. In 1817, David Hare, who had come out to India in 1800 as a watchmaker but who spent his entire life promoting modern education in the country, founded the famous Hindu college. Rammohn Roy provided the most enthusiastic assistance to Hare in this and other educational projects. In addition, he maintained at his own cost an English school in Kolkata from 1817 in which among other subjects mechanics and the philosophy of Voltaire were taught. In 1825, he established a Vedanta college in which courses in both Indian learning and Western social and physical sciences were offered. Rammohn Roy was equally keen on making Bengali the vehicle of intellectual intercourse in Bengal. He compiled a Bengali grammar through his translations, pamphlets, and journals. He helped evolve a modern and elegant prose style for that language. Rammohn represented the first glimmerings of the rise of the national consciousness in India. The vision of an independent and resurgent India guided his thoughts and actions. He believed that by trying to weed out corrupt elements from Indian religion and society and by preaching the Vedantic message of worship of one God, he was laying the foundations for the unity of Indian society, which was divided into divergent groups. In particular, he opposed the rigidities of the caste system, which he declared has been source of want of unity among us. He believed that the caste system was doubly evil. It created inequality and it divided people and deprived them of patriotic feeling. Thus, according to him, one of the aims of religious reform was political uplift. Rammohn Roy was a pioneer of Indian journalism. He brought out journals in Bengali, Persian, Hindi, and English to spread scientific, literary, and political knowledge among the people, to educate public opinion on topics of current interest, and to represent popular demands and grievances before the government. He was also the initiator of public agitation on political questions in the country. He condemned the oppressive practices of the Bengal zamindars, which had reduced the peasants to a miserable condition. He demanded that the maximum rents paid by the actual cultivators of land be permanently fixed so that they too could enjoy the benefits of the permanent settlement of 1793. He also protested against attempts to impose taxes on tax-free lands. He demanded the abolition of the company's trading rights and the removal of heavy export duties on Indian goods. He also raised demands for the Indianization of superior services, separation of the executive and the judiciary, trial by jury, and judicial equality between Indians and Europeans. Rammohn was a firm believer in internationalism and in free cooperation between nations. The poet Rabindranath Tagore was rightly remarked, Rammohn was the only person in his time in the whole world of men. He realized completely the significance of the modern age. He knew that the ideal of human civilization does not lie in the isolation of independence, but the brotherhood of interdependence of individuals as well as nations in all spheres of thought and activities. Ramon Roy took a keen interest in international events and everywhere he supported the cause of liberty, democracy, and nationalism and opposed injustice, oppression, and tyranny in every form. The news of the failure of the revolution in Nepal in 1821 made him so sad that he cancelled all his social engagements. On the other hand, he celebrated the success of the revolution in Spanish America in 1823 by giving a public dinner. He condemned the miserable conditions of Ireland under the oppressive regime of absentee English landlordism. He publicly declared that he would emigrate from the British Empire if Parliament failed to pass the reform bill. Rammohn was as fearless as lion. He did not hesitate to support a just cause. All his life he fought against social injustice and inequality, even at greater personal loss and hardship. In his life of service to society, he often clashed with his family, with rich zamindars and powerful missionaries, and with high officials and foreign authorities. Yet he never showed fear nor shrank from his chosen course. Rammohn was the brightest star in the Indian sky during the first half of the 19th century, but he was not a lone star. He had many distinguished societies, followers, and successors. In the field of education, he was greatly helped by the Dutch watchmaker David Hare and the Scottish missionary Alexander Dobbs. Dwarkanath Tagore was the foremost among his Indian associates. His other prominent followers were Prasanna Kumar Tagore, Chandrasekhar Dev, and Tarachand Chakravarti, the first secretary of the Brahmo Sabha. Then Derozoid and Young Bengal. A radical trend arose among Bengali intellectuals during the late 1820 and 1830s. This trend was more modern than even Rammohn Roy's and was known as the Young Bengal movement. Its leader and inspirer was the young Anglo-Indian Henry Bipin Chandra, who was born on 1809 and who taught at Hindu College from 1826 to 1831. Dereje possessed a dazzling intellect and followed the most radical views of the time. Drawing his inspiration from the great French Revolution, he was a brilliant teacher who, in spite of his youth, attached to himself a host of bright and adoring students. He inspired these students to think rationally and freely, to question all authority, to love liberty, equality, and freedom, and to worship truth. Deroggio and his famous followers, known as the Derogians and Young Bengal, were fiery patriots. Deroggio was perhaps the first nationalist poet of modern India. For example, he wrote in 1827, "My country in the days of glory past, a beauteous halo circled around through brow and worshipped as a deity thou wast. Where is the glory, where that reverence now? The eagle pinion is chained down at last, and groveling in the lowly dust at thou the minstrel hath no wreath to wave for thee, save the sad story of the misery. And one of his pupils, Kasi Prasad Ghosh, wrote in 1861, Land of the gods and lofty name, land of the fair and beauty spell, land of the birds of mighty fame, my native land for your farewell, but oh me, I never shall live to behold that day of the triumph when firmly and bold thou shalt mount on the wings of an eagle on high to the region of knowledge and blessed liberty. Derogio was removed from Hindu College in 1831 because of his radicalism and died of cholera soon after at the young age of 22. The Derogians attacked old and descendant customs, rites, and traditions. They were passionate advocates of women's rights and demanded education for them. They did not, however, succeed in creating a movement because social conditions were not yet ripe for their ideas to flourish. They did not take up the peasants' cause, and there was no other class or group of Indian society at the time which could support their advanced ideas. Moreover, they forgot to maintain their links with the people. In fact, their radicalism was bookish. They failed to come to grips with Indian reality. Even so, the Derogians carried forward Ramon's tradition of educating the people in social, economic, and political questions through newspapers, pamphlets, and public associations. They carried on public agitation on questions such as the revision of the company's charter, the freedom of the press, better treatment for Indian labor in British colonies abroad, trial by jury, protection of the riots from oppressive zamindars, and employment of Indians in the higher grades of government services. Sundarnath Banerjee, the famous leader of the nationalist movement, described the Derogians as the pioneers of the modern civilization of Bengal. The conscript fathers of our race, whose virtues will excite veneration and whose failings will be treated with gentle lest consideration. Then Debendranath Tagore and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. The Brahmo Samaj had in the meanwhile continued to exist, but without much life till Debendranath Tagore, father of Rabindranath Tagore, revitalized it. Debendranath was a product of the best in traditional Indian learning and the new thought of the West. In 1839, he founded the Tattvabodhini Sabha to propagate Ram Mohan Roy's ideas. In time, it came to include most of the prominent followers of Ram Mohan and Derogio and other independent thinkers like Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar and Akhoy Kumar Dutt. The, the Tattvabodhini Sabha and its organ, the Tattvabodhini Patrika, promoted a systematic study of India's past in the Bengali language. It also helped to spread a rational outlook among the intellectuals of Bengal. In 1843, Debendranath Tagore reorganized the Brahmo Samaj and breathed new life into it. The Samaj actively supported the movement for widow remarriage, abolition of polygamy, women's education, improvement of the riots condition, and temperance. The new towering personality to appear on the Indian scene was Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, the great scholar and reformer. Vidyasagar dedicated his entire life to the cause of social reform. Born in 1820 in a very poor family, he struggled through hardship to educate himself and in the end rose in 1851 to the position of principal of Sanskrit College. Though he was a great Sanskrit scholar, his mind was open to the best in Western thoughts and he came to represent a happy blend of Indian and Western culture. His greatness lay above all in his sterling character and shining intellect. Possessed of immense courage and a fearless mind, he practiced what he believed. There was no lag between his beliefs and his action, but his thought and his practice He was simple in dress and habits and direct in his manner. He was a great humanist who possessed immense sympathy for the poor, the unfortunate, and the oppressed. In Bengal, innumerable stories regarding his high character, moral qualities, and keen humanism are related till this day. He resigned from government service for he would not tolerate undue official interference. His generosity up to the poor was fabulous. He seldom possessed a warm coat, for he invariably gave it to the first naked beggar he met on the street. Vidyasagar's contribution to the making of modern India is many sided. He evolved a new methodology of teaching Sanskrit. He wrote a Bengali primer, which is used to this day. His writings helped in the evolution of a modern prose style in Bengal. He opened the gates of Sanskrit college to non Brahmin students, for he was opposed to the monopoly of Sanskrit studies that the priestly caste was enjoying at the time. He was determined to break the priestly monopoly over scriptural knowledge. The free Sanskrit studies from the harmful effects of self imposed isolation. He introduced the study of Western thought in Sanskrit college. He also helped to found a college which is now named after him. Above all, Vidyasagar is remembered gratefully by his countrymen for his contribution to the uplift of India's downtrodden womanhood. Here he proved a worthy successor to Rammohn Roy. He waged a long struggle in favor of widow remarriage. His humanism was aroused to the full by sufferings of Hindu widows. To improve their lot, he gave his all the virtual ruined himself in 1855. He raised his powerful voice, backed by the weight of immense traditional learning in favor of widow remarriage. Soon, a powerful movement in favor of widow remarriage was started, which continues to this day. Later in 1855, a large number of petitions from Bengal, Madras, Bombay, Nagpur, and other cities of India were presented to the government asking it to pass an act legalizing the remarriage of widows. This agitation was successful and such a law was enacted. The first lawful Hindu widow remarriage among the upper castes in our country was celebrated in Kolkata on 7 December 1856 under the inspiration and supervision of Vidyasagar. Widows of many other castes in different parts of the country already enjoyed this right under customary law. An observer has described the ceremony in the following words: I shall never forget the day when Pandit Vidyasagar came with his friend, the bridegroom, at the head of large procession. The crowd of spectators was so great that there was no an inch of moving space, and many fell into the big drains which were to be seen by the sides of Kolkata streets in those days. After the ceremony, it became the subject of discussion everywhere, in the bazaars and the shops, in the streets, in the public squares, in students' lodging houses, in gentlemen's drawing rooms, in offices, and in distant village homes, where even women earnestly discussed it among themselves. The weavers of Santipur issued a peculiar kind of women's sari which contained woven along its border the first line of newly composed song, which went on to say, May Vidyasagar live long. For his advocacy of widow remarriage, Vidyasagar had to face the bitter enmity of the Orthodox Hindus. At times, even his life was threatened, but he fearlessly pursued his chosen course. Through his efforts, which included the grant of monetary help to needy couples, 25 widow remarriages were performed between 1855 and 1860. In 1850, Vidyasagar protested against child marriage. As his life, he campaigned against polygamy. He was also deeply interested in the education of women. As a government inspector of schools, he organized 35 girls' schools, many of which he ran at his own expenses. As secretary to the Bethune School, he was one of the pioneers of higher education for women. The Bethune School, founded in Kolkata in 1849, was the first fruit of the powerful movement for women's education that arose in the 1840s and 1850s. While the education of women was not unknown in India, a great deal of prejudice against it existed. Some even believed that educated women would lose their husbands. The first steps in giving a modern education to girls were taken by the missionaries in 1821, but these efforts were marred by the emphasis on Christian religious education. The Bethune School had great difficulty in securing students. The young students were shouted at and abused, and sometimes even their parents were subjected to social boycott. Many believed that girls who had received Western education would make slaves of their husbands. Then pioneers of pioneers of reform in Western India. The impact of Western ideas was felt much earlier in Bengal than in Western India, which was brought under effective British control as late as 1818. Bal Shastri Jambekar was one of the first reformers in Bombay. He attacked Brahmanical orthodoxy and tried to reform popular Hinduism. In 1832, he started a weekly Darpan with the objective of chasing away the mist of error and ignorance which clouded men's mind and shedding over them the light of knowledge, in which the people of Europe have advanced so far before the other nations of the world. In 1849, the Paramahansa Mandali was founded in Maharashtra. Its founder believed in one God and were primarily interested in breaking caste rules. At its meetings, members looked food cooked by low caste people. They also believed in permitting widow remarriage and in the education of women. Branches of the Mandali were formed in Pune, Satara, and their towns of Maharashtra. Referring to the Mandali's influence on young people, R.G. Bhandarkar, the famous historian, later called later recalled, when we went for long walks in the evening, we talked about the evils of caste distinctions, how much damage was done by this division between high and low, and how true progress for this country could never be achieved without removing these distinctions. In 1848, several educated young men formed the Students' Literary and Scientific Society, which had two branches, the Gujarati and Marathi Dhyan Prasak Mandalis. The society organized lectures on popular science and social questions. One of the aims of the society was to start schools for the education of women. In 1851, Jyotiba Phule and his wife started a girls' school at Pune, and soon many other schools came up. Among the active promoters of these schools were Jagannath Shankar Seth and Bhau Daji. Phule was also a pioneer of the widow remarriage movement in Maharashtra. Vishnu Shastri Pundit founded the Widow Remarriage Association in 1850s. Another prominent worker in this field was Karsandas Mulji, who started the Satyaprakash in Gujarati in 1852 to advocate for widow remarriage. An outstanding champion of new learning and social reform in Maharashtra was Gopal Hari Deshmukh, who became famous by the pen name of Lokahitwadi. He advocated the reorganization of Indian society on rational principles and modern humanistic and secular values. Jyotiba Phule, born in a low-caste Mali family, was also acutely aware of the social degraded position of non-Brahmins and untouchables in Maharashtra. All his life he carried on a campaign against upper caste domination and Brahmanical supremacy. Dadabhai Naroji was another leading social reformer of Bombay. He was one of the founders of an association to reform the Zoroastrian religion and the Parsi Law Association, which agitated for the grant of legal status to women and for uniform laws of inheritance and marriage for the Parsis. From the very beginning, it was in the main through the Indian language, press, and literature that the reformers carried on their struggle. They enabled Indian languages to play his role successfully. They undertook such humdrum tasks as the preparation of language primers, etc. For example, both Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar and Rabindranath Tagore wrote Bengali primers, which are still being used. In fact, the spread of modern and reformist ideas among the mass of people occurred primarily through Indian languages. We should also remember that the significance of the 19th century reformers lay not in their numbers but in the fact that they were the trendsetters. It was their thought and activity that were to have a decisive impact on the making of a new India. So this was the sixth chapter of this book, History of Modern India by Bipin Chandra. Thank you.